And what the happiness research has pretty consistently found is that when you make your day-to-day choices, when you craft your daily experience around the things that matter most to you as an individual, that's when you feel happy. And so I really think that it matters a lot to spend the time and think about who you are, to do a little bit of that self-reflection and the self-probing.
That was Amy Bucher, and you're listening to episode 184 of the Building Psychological Strength podcast, where we uncover the information, tools, and techniques to turn our mind into our most valuable asset.
The courage to face fears with persistence.
Being able to be present enough in this moment to choose my response thoughtfully.
We have the strength to bend to life stressors, to bend to adversity without snapping, without breaking.
There are only 6 things that contribute to our quality of life, and they are all experiences.
In every moment, we are deciding who we want to be and how we want to live our lives.
Noticing what your brain is doing and then being able to make choices.
Mobilize the things that we know lift us up.
Amy, I'm so excited that you're here. I mentioned a little bit before we hopped on to record that I feel like I am both speaking with sort of a soulmate old friend because of the trajectory of our careers and how similar it is, and also a very famous person, given the amazing book that you've written. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, April. And I also did mention to you before, it is so strange to me to, I guess even to have a book out, to have something that I worked on out there in the public without me being present every time somebody consumes it. But I certainly have never thought of myself as a famous person or someone who might be. So very complimentary, very weird.
Yay, good. Well, weird and complimentary, that's how we like to start our episodes. Amazing. Well, I'm excited to dive in because you fall squarely in the group of folks who I love to talk to on this show. And that is someone with incredible expertise in the field of psychology, but also someone who thinks really hard about how to apply theory and evidence and some of the more sterile sounding and feeling parts of the field, how to make them accessible to people and help them apply it to their lives. So can you give us just like a quick snippet of how you got into psych and what you do today, just to help people understand that connection?
Yeah. And actually, it's funny. I feel like if you look back at my career, at my path, it tells a really coherent story. But I feel like at each major decision point, I just really got very lucky. So I got into psychology in college. I was actually going to be an English major. I love to read. Even now, it's my favorite hobby. And so when I was going to college, it made sense to me that I would, make my hobby my topic of study. And I discovered really quickly that that is a way to take a lot of the joy out of the things you love if you put all of the metrics in your life around it. I did my undergrad at Harvard, and at the time, you actually had to declare your major at the end of your first semester. So it was,
Wow.
really quick decision point, not a lot of time to explore options. And so I basically had only enough time to realize that studying English was going to ruin the thing I loved. And a roommate encouraged me to think about psychology because she knew someone who had double majored in English and psychology, and it made sense to her. And I was a little desperate. So I said, all right. And I remember distinctly sitting in our living room of our little student apartment and marking the box for psychology and then signing up for a bunch of psych courses because I had to, get cracking on that. And I was really lucky that I don't think my roommate had this in mind, but she was onto something, which is that what I love about reading is the ability to take other people's perspective, to learn about lives and journeys and challenges other than my own. And that is also something I love about psychology. It's a different toolkit for me to approach that same sort of understanding. So it clicked for me. And sort of like that part of my career was set. But then, I had an advisor who was really encouraging and put the idea of getting a Ph.D. in my head. So again, like very lucky. I didn't set out with that in mind, but I had this mentor who saw in me the potential to do that and actually sat down and helped me select a graduate program that she felt was good for my interests and my skill set. And then, again, I was in grad school and thinking about career and realizing that I wanted to do something applied, but not really having a good sense of what that might be. And ended up stumbling into a couple of early career opportunities that just really set the tone for where I could go. So I ended up at a startup called Health Media that had spun out of the University of Michigan, where I went to school. And it was built around this idea that Dr. Vic Strecker had found in his research, which was that if you can personalize health behavior change information for people, if you give them something that is tailored to their needs, it's more likely to be effective at helping them change their behavior. And so he built this entire company around it with a technology platform and all kinds of applications and support. Started working there, discovered I really loved design, and I was able to learn a lot. That's where I started to really become a designer, I think. And Johnson & Johnson acquired the company. So I was exposed to all of these really amazing career opportunities. And again, just really lucky, serendipitous to have been in the right place at the right time with the right people who, gave me the opportunity to start to do all this great learning. And now today I work for Mad Pow, which is a design consultancy. We're based in Boston and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And a lot of the work that I do is talking with clients about healthcare and financial services and the types of behaviors that they're hoping to have. It might be patients or, members, customers, the types of behavior changes that they want to help people make, and then doing the research to discover what the context is for that behavior change, and then ultimately designing some kind of intervention to help people get to those goals.
I love it so much. And folks listening to this, what I want you to have in mind as we go through really the remainder of this conversation, Amy, you mentioned design as a background. So much of what we focus on within Peak Mind, we do a ton around psychology, obviously, and helping people apply that to their lives. But we take this approach of life design. So the same exact process that you use to figure out how do we make this app or this digital product or this whatever engaging for people or personalized or unique to the goals that they might have. That exact same process, we use that within Peak Mind to help people make meaningful changes within their lives. So folks listening to this, I want you to think about that as we go through the rest of this episode, because Amy's got background in and expertise in some really useful frameworks and theories in psychology that really help power that process and is really the foundation of so much of that work that we do, even though we may not use the same language and the same words as we're going through that within Peak Mind. This is where a lot of that is based. And so I'm really excited to be talking to one of the main, experts in this area. So this is awesome. I'm wondering if we can take a quick turn, because in some of the work that you do, I would say halfway, through your book. It's been so fascinating for a lot of reasons in the work that I do, but you focus on something called self-determination theory. And it sounds like psychologists do. We write in a way that makes everything sound extremely boring and inaccessible. And so of course we named it self-determination theory, right? Instead of as exciting as it actually is under the covers of what it can do for your life. Can you tell us a little bit about that theory and why it's so critical in how we think about motivating people's behaviors, or even where our own behavior might come from?
Yeah, and I'm smiling because you're right. It's a terrible name in terms. It's one of my favorite theories to work with, not just because of how useful and effective it is, but because it really speaks to me and speaks to the way that I want to think about living my own life. But it has this very, very academic sounding name that I don't think does it justice in the general public world. And I also have to laugh because when I talk about self-determination theory and people are interested in it, the place I send them is selfdeterminationtheory.org. So it's like, here's the technical name with a .org domain, but that is a great resource if you want to learn more. They keep a really nice repository of the research on self-determination theory. So there's two major parts to it that I keep in mind when I'm using it to think about a design problem, and again, turning around to my own life at times. So the first is that when we think about being motivated, we don't want to necessarily just think about high or low, are you motivated, yes or no? You want to think about what is the source of that motivation. And they call it motivational quality. But the idea is that there are some types of motivation that are stronger and more enduring than others. And those are the motivations that connect to something that's really personal to you. And it might be your values. It might be a goal that you have that's important to you. It might be the type of person that you think of yourself as. So your sense of identity. The types of motivation that are a little bit less effective, especially when something is hard or requires a lot of time and persistence to accomplish, are what they call controlled forms of motivation. And that tends to be external to the person. That's when someone's told you what to do, or you're doing something in order to get a reward. Those things can get people started down a behavior change path. But if you're looking at a lifelong change and you expect that you're going to encounter obstacles along the way, which realistically we usually do, you really want to try to think about what matters most to you, and can you create a narrative that ties these behaviors to those values or those goals, because that's what's going to keep you going when the going gets tough. To be able to look back at that story and say, hey, I'm doing this hard thing because it helps me with something that really matters. And then the second piece that is very helpful when I think about design is that along the way, you want to try to create experiences that feed your basic psychological needs. And doing that is going to basically give you the oomph to keep engaging with the hard thing. And so those basic psychological needs are autonomy, or having meaningful choice. And as a designer, that's a really useful thing to think about, is how do I give people opportunities at various junctures to say what matters to them, and then to actually provide that to them, to give them meaningful choice in their experience, as opposed to just imposing on them what I as the designer think might be the best thing. It's also competence, so wanting to learn and grow. And lately, I've really been thinking about the image of throwing a stone into a pond, right? When we do that, we see the ripples in the water as a result of the stone hitting the surface. And I think similarly, that's the way that we go through life. We want to see that the things we do in the world create ripples in the pond. And seeing that gives us a sense of accomplishment. It helps us feel that we matter, that our experience matters. And so again, when we're designing experiences or products, how do we give people opportunities to see that the efforts they're making matter in some way? And then the third one is relatedness, which is feeling like you belong to something larger than yourself. And I think this one makes a lot of intuitive sense to people, because we're such social creatures. Being part of a relationship or a community is really essential to feeling like our day-to-day experience is important and fulfilling. So again, looking for opportunities, whether it's actually through connecting people to each other. There is definitely times in my design career where we're creating a social networking opportunity, for example, or we're pairing people with a mentor. Those sorts of things can work, but we can also do a lot, even with technology or with the content we create, to reflect back to people that, we hear you, we see you, and you matter in that relationship type of way. So those are the two big things with self-determination theory, is understanding what motivates people and really trying to understand that in a very personal and meaningful sense. And then once we get into the design component, trying to support them in those basic psychological needs so that they can keep on track with the behavior that is hopefully supporting a meaningful motivation.
Tell me if this sounds like you. I'll finally be happy. I'll finally take a breath. I'll finally find some balance when I get through this crazy season of life. We hear that from so many people, and the fact is, many times, life is just a crazy season. All of it. Between your career, your family, your community obligations, attempting to have a social life, and trying to fit in self-care, whatever that is, we end up feeling stretched so thin. Now, I want to challenge you to think about things differently. Rather than focusing on external circumstances and their impact on your happiness, your sense of ease and balance, and your mental well-being, what if, instead, you focused on something you can actually control? What if you built the psychological strength that would allow you to thrive through life when things are going well and even when they're not? What if you could feel less scattered, more in control, less anxious, more peaceful and joyful? We want that for you too. That's why we are so beyond excited to announce the beta release of our signature Psych Strength Building program, Ascend. This program combines evidence-based tools, techniques, and information from the fields of psychology and life design to focus on 3 important modules: you, your mind, and your life. Learn your unique combination of strengths, values, and identity, and the ways in which they interact and lead you to approach life in your unique way. Dig into your mind to understand the conscious and subconscious processes that act as a lens through which you experience life. And finally, Harness the power of life design to begin to steer your life into alignment with who you uniquely are. Enrollment in this beta round of Ascend is open now, and because it's our beta round, the price is astonishingly low. So if you have ever had even a suspicion that you could benefit from building psychological strength through a guided, science-backed experience, now is the time. Visit www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend for more information and to join us. Friends, it is time to build psychological strength. It's time to live by design and not by default. It is time to live like your life depends on it, because it does. Join us in Ascend by visiting www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend. That's www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend. I love it. That's such a good explanation. And it makes me think about, this is going to be a bit of a left turn comment to make, but I swear it's related. There was a blog post by a woman named, I might butcher her last name, but Bronnie Ware. And she was a palliative care worker. She worked with people who were at the end of their life, and she talked to them. This blog post is called The Regrets of the Dying. And they had some shockingly common regrets that they spoke about. And one of them is that they regret not living authentically as the person who they truly are. They regret instead living in a way that aligned to what they thought other people wanted of them. And this is really echoing in my mind as you're explaining both, these sources of motivation being external versus internal, because when we live in alignment with what other people want of us, and it's not actually who we are, there's some dissonance, there's some friction, there's some yuck there. So this is so related. And then two, when we actually are honest about who we are, honest about what we value and what we enjoy doing and what we don't, and what we're willing to commit to and what we aren't, that friction tends to go away. There tends to be a little bit of a lift. There's a weight taken off of us. I'm wondering if you've ever thought about it in the realm of just, I guess, day-to-day life experience and how different that can be for people if they're focusing on external versus internal motivation.
Yeah, I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about this. And it's not, I love that you made that comment, because I don't think it's something I really talk a lot about in the book. So I don't know that you would have even known this. But a lot of my interest is in happiness and how do people experience happiness? What makes people feel happy? And a lot of the work in that area that I found most compelling is specifically focused on authenticity. So it connects back to self-determination theory in the sense that through both lenses, you really want to understand what values you have, like what matters to you individually. And it will be different from person to person, even though there's other research that shows that there are some universal values. Most people have some kind of value around family. Most people have some kind of value around professional accomplishments or work or whatever that means in their life. But the specifics of it are very individual. And what the happiness research has pretty consistently found is that when you make your day-to-day choices, when you craft your daily experience around the things that matter most to you as an individual, that's when you feel happy. And so I really think that it matters a lot to spend the time and think about who you are, to do a little bit of that self-reflection and the self-probing. And it feels frivolous sometimes. I think that we live in a world where we are seeing a lot of injustice and really serious fundamental issues that, it can feel very sort of like, I don't know, very privileged to be able to say, like, we need to sit down and reflect on ourselves and what matters. But the exercise of doing that lets us make decisions in the day-to-day that I think better equips us to help out with some of those bigger societal issues, if that's what we choose to do, if that's what our authentic self is. So I think it is really important to do that, and, lends itself to that experience of living a happier life.
I love that you went there. That's amazing. And two, the sort of peeling back of the layers of who you really are and understanding yourself at the core. One, people don't do it again because exactly as you said, it feels frivolous. It feels like it's indulgent. It feels like maybe it's selfish to be spending that time when there are quote unquote more important things you could be doing. But another thing that I notice about, folks who we've worked with in the past within Peak Mind is that at the beginning, a lot of people feel like, oh yeah, I know this. Oh yeah, I already know. I know. But it's not until you intentionally dig in, okay, let's go step by step and then start to put things together. Let's go step by step into what your values are. You don't get to value everything. Let's say we give you 3 or we give you 5. What makes that list? And by the end, you're making some pretty tough choices on what's going to make that top list of 5 things. But if you're really honest about that and you're really true to what feels right for you, that's very revealing. We move into strengths. What are you really good at? And then, quite honestly, what are you not as good at? And where I find some interesting things happen is when you get people to start looking at the interplay between them, because a strength in communication might show up very differently for somebody who, values achievement and values checking off goals and whatever, versus somebody who values community, as their number one thing. And it gets really interesting when you start to see the interplay between those. And that's where I feel like people don't, if they've done some of the intentional work to learn about themselves, they haven't taken it to that point where they've really started to look at the interplay between these things.
Yeah, absolutely not. And I will say, I sometimes say research is me search, which I thought was a really common thing. And I've discovered recently, a lot of people haven't heard that. But the idea that if you are a researcher, the topics that you're drawn to are often the ones that you struggle with personally. So you're almost revealing something about yourself when you talk about the things that you study. And so I've noticed, I've had the opportunity professionally to go through a lot of different experiences that are designed to help people figure out what matters most to them. And I've noticed that they're not always easy for me to do. It is a lot of work, and it's helpful to have the structure and the expertise of someone to walk you through that. When I worked for Johnson & Johnson, they had also acquired a company called Human Performance Institute, which does, they call it energy management coaching. So it started off as a program for elite athletes. And then over the years, they started serving C-suite executives who were experiencing, I think what a lot of your listeners are, this, they've reached a point in their lives where their careers are really demanding. They're at the top tiers of their careers, but they also have families and hobbies and other things they care about. And there's no way to manufacture more time in the day to take care of everything. And so the Human Performance Institute coaching, it's like a 2 to 3 day intense in-person experience. And part of what they do is they teach you to write your old story, your current story of how you're living your life, and then to write your future story, the story of the you who is living authentically and doing everything that you value. And then recognizing some of the distortions that are causing your story today not to look like the story of your ideal self, of your future you. And the idea is that once you get these 2 stories down on paper, you can start to really crystallize what's important to you and then make decisions that support those things, which does not mean that you do everything. It means that you prioritize the things that are really important to you. And maybe there are some things that don't get done, but that's okay, because those are the things that are less authentic to you as a person. I will say they had all of us go through the Human Performance Institute procedure, and I really struggled with it as much as I have the professional interest in it, because as a human being, it's really hard to interrogate your life that way. And I think what I found especially hard was finding the right words to describe the things that matter most to me in a way that felt right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What we found within, the work that we're putting together, we recently announced the beta version of, our sort of signature psych strength building program. It's called Ascend. And one of the things that we've found is really helping us. And I love that I'm geeking out on a podcast interview with somebody who's working in the field of design, because I think this is going to make a lot of sense to you. We've pulled in a ton of sort of design thinking methodology where we're using things like Mad Libs, and we're using just some very visual techniques where you start to see connections that you wouldn't have seen before. because you can't do it unless it's down on paper, or you can't do it unless somebody, asks you to draw that line and now draw this other line. And how do these things look different to you? And so it's been really fun to take people through these different sorts of exercises that you wouldn't necessarily do if you sat down, say, to journal. It wouldn't be something that you would probably think to do if you were going to sit down and journal. But it's been really fun to take people through that.
Yeah. And at Mad Pow, one of the things so I've been there a little over 4 years, and I found that it's the first time I've worked in an organization that calls itself a design organization. So I've worked with designers and doing design tasks in the past, but this is the first time that that's been kind of a hardcore focus of where I work. One of the things that I've learned there, and now it's a tool in my toolkit, is participatory design, which is exactly what you're talking about, engaging people in these non-traditional creative activities. And the way that we think about it is that it helps them express some of their latent needs that they may not have the vocabulary to express in a more explicit way. But one activity that we do with people that's really fun, and I've had research participants walk in the room and visibly roll their eyes when they see what we have planned for them. But we get crafting supplies, and we structure a conversation around whatever the behavior change issue at hand is. But ultimately, we end up asking them to create a magic object that, if reality weren't a constraint, would solve the problem that we've been talking about. And what we find is when they go through this exercise, and especially when they talk to us about, what their thought process is in putting their object together, we start to see patterns and themes, and we start to learn things that people wouldn't be able to tell us if we were just asking them, like you said, to journal or, answer a straightforward interview question. And sometimes the insights from it are actually pretty straightforward. Like, one thing that we've learned consistently in doing these sorts of activities with health behaviors is people are often looking for positive feedback. They feel like they're making a lot of effort, and they are not getting recognized at individual choice points when they do the quote unquote right thing. They're basically being judged on the sum total at the end of the day. Did you come in under your calorie goal? Did you get enough steps? And so we hear consistently from people like, okay, I missed my step goal at the end of the day, but I also went out on my lunch break and did a walk around the parking lot when I could have just surfed the web. And nobody congratulated me for that. Nobody recognized that I did a hard thing in that moment and had a small success. And so that's a learning that we've taken forward when we make design choices. Like, how can we find opportunities to congratulate those small positive progress points, regardless of what happens with the larger goal?
I love that too, because we don't realize, just as we're moving through our day, this is something you and I connected on a little bit before we started recording, how much involuntary, and I'll say both behavior and cognition, and I'm using a very broad definition to cognition, happens during the day that influences our experience. And some of the things that we love to dig into and teach people about, because you don't realize it until somebody points it out and says, that's when it happened right there, are these biases that we have of the type of information we tend to focus on, the type that tends to just go and happen outside of our awareness. And we don't do a great job, not everyone, but a lot of us don't do a great job of keeping track of our wins throughout the day. We tend to notice if somebody criticizes, we tend to notice if we fell short of something, but we don't tend to place a lot of emphasis around when we've done something amazing. We sort of achieve and then it's on to the next. And we don't focus on that enough. It's been actually Ashley Smith, my business partner with Peak Mind, she has her patients who come to her for therapy track their wins on a daily basis, and they're always shocked at how much ends up on that list on a daily basis because we just don't even see it. So those biases and those cognitive processes that sort of run in the background that completely color our day-to-day experience, I love that you're bringing them to the forefront. And even if the person can't explicitly tell you, I wish somebody would have congratulated me, man, it feels good in that moment to have someone point it out if you would have just blazed right past it as you live your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think about it, we know from research that negative information outweighs positive information and how much, we perceive it, we feel it. And so I hear that finding, and I just think of so many different ways that it can be applied, like whether it's in your personal life and making sure that the people you love know that you appreciate them. Like they need to hear a lot more thank yous than criticism. Or if you're a manager, pointing out the wins that your employees are having day to day. And then designing programs. Like I design a lot of things that have feedback, and it is very easy to focus on sort of the ultimate clinical metric. And so we need to be really mindful about how can we find opportunities to help a person feel like they're making progress. And especially when they're first starting out at something and they don't have the confidence or the reassurance that whatever they're doing is going to be effective in the long run. We really need to think about how do we help people feel good and recognize the progress that they're making.
I love that. Do you have tips for people about how they can, how they can become a little bit more intentional in the way that, this is such a broad question, but in the way that they live? So, you mentioned again before we hopped on to record a project that you recently did that was around renters insurance. And it was sort of like it's an insurance project. Like this isn't maybe on the surface level the most interesting topic, but it ended up being meaningful to you because you made intentional choices about your own insurance that you hadn't made in the past, and you get a sense of peace from that. There's a million behaviors and decisions or indecisions that we make on a daily basis that we pay no attention to. Do you have any tips from the work that you've done about how to get people to notice those moments a little bit more, to think about them a little bit more, to intentionally act or decide a little bit more? Any tips there?
Yeah. So actually, I think that this is one where a little upfront planning goes a long way. And, we've talked a bunch now about how do you figure out what is important to you and what your values are. One thing that I did and have done repeatedly over the years is take the values and action survey. So Christopher Peterson, who is one of the creators of that, was also one of my mentors in grad school. So I've been aware of it since it was pretty new.
So good. It's so good.
Yeah, it's great. And one of the things that consistently comes out of it, also, by the way, to your point earlier about how hard it is sometimes to make some of these choices, I find that the way the survey is structured, it's actually not that hard to talk about what's important to you. So it's a little bit less like cognitively effortful to go through that instrument than some of the other ways to figure out what's important to you, I think. But consistently, my results show that one of my top values is a love of learning. I'm curious. I like adventures. And I have deliberately, like knowing that about myself, when I go into an experience where I suspect it might be hard for me, and the renters insurance project is a great one because I do not have a pre-existing interest in renters insurance. Like I'm not an insurance nerd by any means, but when I go into a new project or a new experience, I explicitly think to myself, what can I learn from this? What new thing can I take away from this? Where can I find something interesting? And with a lot of my work projects, what that thing ultimately ends up being is some kind of improvement to my own life. So I don't think renters insurance is that interesting, but I do have homeowners insurance, and I learned a lot about how all that type of insurance works. And so I'm going to take something away that I can use to improve my own insurance. And that's going to be sort of the nugget of learning, of adventure that I find in this. And I found lately with the COVID-19 pandemic, like most people, I've been staying at home for the most part the last few months. My day-to-day life has really been constrained compared to what it used to be. And I've had to be very mindful about carving out these. I really do think of them as adventures. How can I do something that is going to feel like a discovery? It's going to feel like something new. And a lot of times that looks like just walking to a new part of my neighborhood and like being deliberate about not going on my same routes. I'm going to watch a TV show or read a book that's not like something I would normally do. We've ordered takeout from restaurants that we wouldn't typically patronize, actually, in many cases, because they wouldn't typically deliver to us. But it's like, okay, let's take advantage of this moment and do something different. I don't know that those strategies would work for everybody, but because I know that I have this core value of love of learning and adventure, like it plugs into something that I need and I value. And so I think if you can do that upfront work of clarifying what is important to you, and then think about a framework in which you can seek that out in your day-to-day decisions, it can help you be a little bit more intentional along the way.
That's beautiful, because you think about the COVID-19 situation, and you could have someone who's on a completely opposite end of that continuum who really craves routine and really does well with structure. So you're on sort of the adventure side, like I need things to be new and fresh and maybe surprising from what my day-to-day experience is. And you might have somebody else who really craves that structure. Both are great, both are right, but you would make very different decisions about how you structure that hour of free time in your day based on what you know about yourself. And that is the crux. You can't say it any more succinctly. That is life design wrapped up in a neat little bow. Like, get to know yourself and then do things that align with that. It is very self-deterministic. It's awesome.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right too. I've, one of the things that I have enjoyed, and I have found this whole crisis, I think, as most people have, to be very alarming and disruptive, but it also makes time and geography matter differently or less. And so I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people who I ordinarily wouldn't have talked to. And I have found that there are some people who are like, this is great, I never have to leave my house. Like, so yeah, it's been interesting to see how it plays out differently for different people. But one of the things that is really cool about it is there are opportunities for everybody to shape their experience, at least in some respects, in a way that honors who they are and what they value.
100%. I'm curious, with your background and your expertise being as deep and applicable as it is, what does psychological strength mean to you? What does it mean to be psychologically strong?
So I think my definition of psychological strength has a lot in common with the ideas of resilience or grit. But for me, it really comes back to that idea of authenticity and understanding your autonomous sources of motivation. So psychological strength is knowing who you are enough that when you get knocked off course, you're able to find your way back to the road. So, really defining that idea of who you are and coming back to it every time. And I don't think that psychological strength means that you never get knocked off the road. We're human beings. We encounter obstacles. We sometimes make mistakes, and that is fine and expected. It's not about how frequently that happens. It's about, are you able to find your way back?
So good. That is so good. I know people are going to want to know more about you after this conversation, because there's so much that applies both to our individual day-to-day lives, but also your background in design and the way that you approach your work is so unique. It's really an emerging field. So if there are some psych buffs who are listening to this, you're going to really love Amy's book and all the work that she's doing. Can you tell us a little bit about how we can find you, how we can check out the book, all of that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the book is called Engaged: Designing for Behavior Change, and it's published by Rosenfeld Media. So they're a small publishing house. If you could buy the book directly from them, that's amazing, because, small business, and they are a fabulous group to work with. But it is also available on Amazon. And I blog at amybucherphd.com. I basically took a break from it for about a year while I wrote the book, but I'm trying to be more active now that I don't have a major writing project at going back frequently to that site. I am on Twitter at AmyBPhD, and I really like to meet people that way. It feels kind of like informal and friendly to talk on the social media. And I work for Mad Pow. So we're at madpow.com, and you can see some examples of our work there. And we have an insight section where we also have, there's some white papers that I've helped write, and there's some work that my colleagues have posted about that participatory design technique that I mentioned as well. So if that caught your interest, there's some resources on madpow.com.
Amazing. And we'll make sure that we link all of that up in the show notes description. And if you're listening to this on your phone, you should be able to scroll down on whatever platform you're on and get all of those links. So feel free to link directly to any of those amazing resources that Amy gave us. And you also mentioned that your publisher might have a little deal for us.
Yeah, they are usually very happy to make a promo code, and typically that's for a 20% discount. Actually, now that I've said it on the recording, it will be for a 20% discount. So they don't get a choice anymore. But if you purchase directly from Rosenfeld Media, the promo code will be good for a 20% discount.
Amazing. So we'll make sure that we have all of that in your episode description and on your show notes page as well. So if you're interested in the book, like I mentioned, I'm halfway through. It is awesome. You absolutely could apply this both to your work. I don't care what kind of work you do. It would really, the principles and the information in that book would apply. And also, if you just come at it with the mindset of how do I apply this to my own life, 100% the book applies. So I would highly suggest anybody check it out. It's a really great resource. Amy, this has been awesome. I'm so excited to have met you, and I'm really excited that we made this happen. I was one of those people who was just like, this lady's really cool and she's doing really cool work, and I'm just going to reach out to her on social media and see what happens. And here you are. So thank you for being willing and for being open to share your expertise and your background with us. This has just been awesome.
Yeah, well, and I want to thank you too, because on the flip side, and this is why I love social media and Twitter so much, I feel like I have learned so much from you, and I'm really excited now to have this podcast in my life. And you've mentioned some of your previous guests and things, and so I feel like I have tapped into this treasure trove that I might not have known about otherwise. So thank you very much.
Yay, thanks so much. It's a simple fact that nearly everyone in the world could benefit from building psychological strength, but not everyone will put in the time and effort to do so, but today you did. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Building Psychological Strength. Now, if you're interested in building the mental toughness, confidence, and resilience you need to thrive through life's ups and downs, visit us at www.peakmindpsychology.com. Also, if there's someone in your life who could benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And if you yourself found this episode valuable, meaning if you took away even one insight that you can use to build psychological strength in your own life, we would so appreciate it if you would drop us a rating and a review on iTunes. The thing is, the more ratings and reviews we have, the easier it is to get this powerful and important content out to the people who need to hear it. Remember, your mind can be your most valuable asset or your biggest liability, and you get to choose. So choose wisely, my friend. And I'll see you next time on Building Psychological Strength.